You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. On our podcast, the goal is not just to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon and talk about what we're learning and what God is doing in us and in our community. The conversation you're about to join was inspired by our Fall 2023 sermon series, In the Wilderness. In this sermon series, we're walking with the Israelites from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land and looking at what we can learn about trusting God more, even when the journey looks different than we anticipated or expected. You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
Fish loaves?
Fish loaves.
Fish loaves.
It's an old family recipe.
Yeah.
Meatloaf, but made with fish.
Actually, I wouldn't be mad at that. That sounds like, I was imagining like bread with fish in it, kind of like, I don't know, where you have fruit in bread and like there's little pieces or chocolate chips in it.
No, I'd imagine it more like a crab cake.
Yeah, like a very large crab cake.
Did we just come up with a new money-making proposal for the congregation? Start working on your best fish loaf recipe, and then we'll
imitation crab only.
Oh,
That would be horrible. But no, there are loaves. I'm Googling currently.
okay.
There's a recipe for a salmon and crab loaf.
All right, so we'll start planning a new potluck just to try out people's more
a self-serving
interesting
potluck.
recipes.
Yeah, and I'm realizing that we are slowly turning into a food podcast, and I'm not mad about that.
Maybe we should change it to the Fat Pastors podcast.
Honestly, it's probably already taken, so I'll have to come up with a more creative title.
Wow.
But you alluded to a time in college where you had prayed for you to be able to trust God more. Was that what was the?
Yeah, the idea was, God, would you increase my faith or increase my trust in you? And that sounded like a great thing to pray. This was my sophomore year. I was serving as essentially the hall chaplain in the dorm. And you just start praying like, God, would you increase my trust in you? And again, that sounded like a great idea, but do you know how God increased our trust? He puts us in hard situations. And so that fall, maybe even by fall break, all this happened. But was in a car accident, totaled my car. One of the freshmen on my hall over fall break went home, was involved in a motorcycle accident and died. And the long-term relationship I'd been in since like the middle of high school came to a very clear end. And so, yeah, that was a lot for a 19-year-old trying to figure out what it looks like to follow Jesus. And I mean, I'd been a Christian a long time, but as an adult away at college and then, being the hall chaplain, trying to help walk the rest of the guys on the hall through that tragic situation and all that kind of stuff. So I learned very quickly, be careful what you pray for. And I don't think God caused all those things to happen just so I could learn to trust him more. But in the context, it all just kind of came together. And he doesn't waste any of that, right? He uses all those situations that we find ourselves in, no matter whether we were praying for him or not. He wants to use those things. But yeah, I learned my lesson on that one. Have you ever pray for something and get an answer?
Well, more recently, it's just been, Lord, help me sympathize with the wealthy. Because I'm hoping to have him really test me.
Yeah.
No, what was I just reading? I think it was in 1 John 5, verse 15, and then I'll bring it back. It says, "And since we know he hears us when we make our requests, we also know that he will give us what we ask for. And a lot of times that verse is used for prosperity gospel. Like, you ask it of God, he gives it to you. But if you put it in context...
What?
Verse 14, and I'll read it all the way through. Verse 14, and we are confident that he hears us whenever we ask for anything that pleases him. And since we know he hears us when we make our request, we also know that he will give us what we ask for. And in other translations, it talks about asking for God's will. And when we pray for God's will, he hears us. And then when he hears us, he gives us what we ask for. And so it's that focus on desiring God's will over everything else.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's the only thing we pray for, right? We still ask him for things that we don't know if they're a part of his will, and he hears those, and we don't know where and how those things affect what he ends up doing and affects his will. But I think it's just been more of a journey of me getting to a place where I'm more sincerely desire that. Where, like, when you first start off, like, Lord, your will be done. And then it starts happening, and you're like, okay, God, how about we try my way?
Yeah.
But then even through the ups and downs, to still more sincerely desire his will to be done, I think that has been a prevailing theme, especially in the past, say, 7 years of my life. And so, yeah, I don't know if I can't think of a time, the whole joke of, like, ask for more patience, and then he gives you, and then there's...
But that's kind of the progression we go through in our walk with God, isn't it? Like, we often will come to him because of some felt need that drives us there, whether it's, a fear of going to hell or some tragedy that's happened in our life. It pushes us to God, and we go to God because it feels like he can satisfy that need. And then over time, we grow a bit, and that relationship deepens, but then it shifts into like this. And so I walk with God because of all the good things he does in my life. And it's still kind of more focused on what God does for us and can do for us. But then somewhere along the way, hopefully, we get to a point where it's like, no, whether those good things are there or not, I'm going to keep walking with God. And I've learned to trust him. And even though the things I might want personally or feel like I need, he doesn't meet, he's still good, and he's still worth worshiping and walking with and following.
And sometimes when we think that he doesn't meet that need or desire or fill that spot, he has, it's just not in the way that we wanted.
Yes.
And that's sometimes the hardest to accept or even see. Yeah, and so you touched on a lot of, like, how the Israelites really hyper-focused in on the past. We'd rather be in slavery since we don't know in the future when our next meal will be because we're in the desert. And so I was wondering if there's something...
Or at least the next meal they wanted to eat would be, because they knew that manna was coming every morning.
Facts. Was wondering if there was a thing or example that you have from your life where you really, like, put too much attention and dwell on something of the past that kind of was unhealthy to focus on, or it didn't help you draw closer to God.
I think the time that most clearly sticks out in my mind related to the accident that we were involved in. And it wasn't a fixation like I wanted to go back there, but it was the regret over what had happened. It was the coulda, shoulda, wouldas of what if we had done this differently? What if I had done that differently? What if we had left at a different time? What if, visas had been approved faster? All that kind of stuff.
To clarify, it's not the accident when you were 19 in college.
Right, not that car accident. Sorry, it was the accident that happened when we were serving as missionaries in Uganda. that took the life of a little boy. And then I got stuck in that for a while, a long while, and didn't even necessarily realize that I was until much later along the way, when it started to have an impact on other areas of life and marriage and family. And it's ultimately what, all of that coming to a head is kind of what, brought us home from Uganda. And so then even after we came back, there was a lot of work I had to do with a counselor and therapist and that kind of stuff. And working through just that whole situation and what I had told myself in response to that, and learning that more healing was possible than I had hoped or known. And so that'd probably be the clearest example that I can think of.
Yeah. Mine's way pettier.
That's okay. It's a heavy conversation today, so go for it.
In 3rd grade, I was the lead in a play, and the other girl that was like my co-lead, whatever, she stole my last line. Like, and so like I was about to do it, and then she said it, and then like it was over. I don't think she did it on purpose, but like well into high school. Like I didn't even see her. Like we weren't even in the same school after like 5th or 6th grade. And then like she kept popping up in certain social circles. And I was like, how dare you? How dare you? The audacity to do something on accident in 3rd grade. And so, I had so many grudge and anger issues as a child. And that I think like shows the most because it means absolutely nothing. And yet like really like it would make me irate just thinking about it.
What about the opposite side? Do you ever feel tempted to like look forward to the next thing or the next season or
1000%? Yeah, so for me, traveling and hiking and exploring the world and stuff was always a really, really big aspect of my life. And I think I put so much more hope in the next adventure or the next trip. And that's where I like hyper-focused my time and attention that was more free, I guess, outside of my responsibilities. And so, like I mean, and it's not a bad thing to desire to see things in this lifetime, but to make them your hope, I think is the big differentiation there. And so being a procrastinator, I never actually finished it, but I started a world map corkboard. And because I was subscribed to like Backpacker magazine and some other nature magazines and travel stuff, that I would tear out pictures of stuff and I'd fold them up and pin them to the globe so that whenever I got the chance to go to some area, just undo that and then I'd have the list of things I wanted to go see.
Sure.
Instead of having to research in the moment, because I was just always constantly inspired to go places. And no, I mean, as much as I'd love to see so many things, nothing compares to the glory of God. And yes, we see that through his nature, but you don't have to fly to the remote parts of Thailand in order to see his nature and his glory. It's available in the U.S. of A. No, well, it's true. It's very
that is true.
In the U.S. of A. But, and it's not that taking that part of me away has made it like I don't get to travel. I've gotten to travel still much more than anticipated in places, and it's been great, but I'm not sitting around once a week just thinking of the next thing. How can I afford it? When can I go? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that used to be very regular in my life for maybe 3-4 years. And I hear youth talking all the time of like, the whole point of me getting a job is so that I can go here and there. And like, that's the main point. And I try to find a way to explain of like, I'm not against you going to those places, but I don't think your what you're spending 40 hours a week on should be based around 2 weeks of every year.
Yeah.
When God has things for you throughout the year for you to be doing and going to and people to love and interact with. And so just kind of reestablishing those priorities. But yeah, if anyone's ever going anywhere in the world, I know probably too much about too many places.
Including all the best restaurants to eat.
Including all the best restaurants. But
this isn't a food podcast.
Yes, this isn't a food podcast. And I do also realize that like some of the things I'm attracted to may be the most boring things in the world for other people.
Sure.
Everyone travels different. Everyone's interested in different things. I try to convince Rebecca. Actually, I succeeded in convincing Rebecca to let us go to the world's tallest filing cabinet in Burlington, Vermont.
You are so weird.
Which is like 36 tall, I think. It's literally just in this empty field that's considered a park and this rusted, super tall.
And you probably stopped and saw the world's largest ball of twine, too.
I wish. I didn't know where it was. I won't go out of my way for stuff like that. But if I'm already passing through, I'll absolutely stop. World records in general just fascinate me.
Yeah.
And that used to be a bucket list item for the longest time that I'd want to break one. Excuse me. But yeah, and then there's just a bunch of very interesting, weird things out in this world. And tell me someone else, name one other person that you know that's visited that.
Can't.
Exactly. You know, how many
Rebecca.
people went to see the foliage? Every person that's been to Vermont. So I'm making memories that no one else has. I didn't say they were good memories. Anyway, Scott, what have you looked for in the future? Or maybe like really put a hyper focus on that maybe wasn't the most fruitful for your life at the time?
Yeah, I found myself doing it a little bit this fall. You know, when everything just seems to be outside of my own control. You know, all the stuff that's going on in our denomination is out there. It's beyond my control. Stuff with Meg and her health and trials and stuff at that point beyond my control, nothing I could do about it. And so we started planning this trip for the spring out to the Grand Canyon and Bryce Canyon and Canyonlands and Capitol Reef, all these national parks out in the Southwest that we haven't been to yet. And at first it's just like, oh, we've said we want to do this. We've only got a couple more summers with all of our boys still in high school or below. And but then in the midst of all this, like, I can't control any of this stuff that's going on. It was very easy to focus in on, like, all right, what are all the things we want to see? How do I plan the perfect itinerary? What baseball games can we see in new ballparks along the way? And all this stuff. And then I realized one day, like, oh, I'm kind of using this as escapism to avoid all the real stuff of life that's happening around me that feels out of control, and that probably isn't the most healthy thing. But we are still going to go on the trip.
It's so much fun.
We're just not going to focus on it in the same way leading up to it, but it is something that we've been wanting to do.
Now, are the boys as equally excited and involved in that planning process?
They might not quite be as excited as I am, but they are super excited about seeing the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, because I was like, I was going to buy you an excuse and be like, that's family time.
Yeah.
Dreaming it all out together. But if it's just you on a computer and then mentioning something every 40 minutes to everyone, that might not be.
I keep asking them, like, well, what are some things you want to do on this? Or where do you want to go?
Like,
what
I
kind of
don't
things?
know.
They're like,
It's just a desert.
yeah, we just want to, sounds cool. Okay. But a couple years ago, we did a trip like this, but it was out to Yellowstone and Grand Teton, and we stopped at Theodore Roosevelt National Park on the way, and saw some baseball games in Minneapolis and Milwaukee, and it was one of those. Came back through St. Louis so we could see the Arch and a Cardinals game, and just one of those family memory kind of things that we still talk about and point back to, and we want to do that again. Yeah, that's kind of the consensus feeling.
I need to get Theo a better memory and
Yeah, well, there is a certain point you need to wait to so they actually do remember it.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many things we've done together, and the boys are like, oh, I don't remember that. Like, yeah, I know.
That's why it's like, now that we got the second on the way, it like resets the clock of when we can do some of those bigger.
Yeah. And some of those things you just do because you have the opportunity to. Like, when we were in Uganda, we went to language school down in Tanzania. We had opportunity to go on safari in Tanzania, and that was a great opportunity that
and
we
the kids
had.
work as bait.
Yeah. Saw a couple lions on that trip. Just dangling the boys out the window. Yeah. But our boys don't actually really remember that. But we have pictures of them, and
Oh, no, that's sweet.
Jeremy, before we wrap up this episode, tell us about the milestone that we're about to hit as a podcast.
Yeah, so we are exceptionally close to getting over 3,000 listens. And we mentioned before we'd like to do kind of a giveaway. And so we have the details for that giveaway. Right here in front of me, I have 6 books. We have The Purpose-Driven Life by
Rick Warren.
Rick. I want to call him Ricky, but people don't know him like I do. And we also have Prayer by Dennis Kinlaw. We have Taken by Surprise, the Asbury Revival of 2023, which is a book put out by Seedbed about the whole outpouring from last year, which is amazing. And we got that on at our conference in Houston. I also have Jesus Outside the Lines by Scott Sauls. It's a way forward for those who are tired of taking sides, which is an interesting book, especially as we enter into another political season. Next, we have The Root of the Righteous by A.W. Tozer, and The Quest for Holiness, From Shallow Belief to Mature Believer by David C. Long. These are all great reads recommended by either both of us or one of us. And so if you would like to enter and to win a few of these or a couple of these, the way this is going to work is we would like you to post your favorite episode of the podcast. Can be a sermon, can be a conversation, can be an interview with one of our people, and post it on Facebook. Tag the church in it so we can see it, because algorithms, sadly, you might not come up with a specific post.
First United Methodist Church of Collingwood.
Yeah, First United Methodist Church of Collingswood. And in 2 weeks' time of today, so if you do that by Sunday, November 5th, then we will put your name into a wheel, and we will announce the winners on our podcast that gets released on November 8th. Depending on who gets picked when, we'll get to pick a few of the books from the pile that we just mentioned, and we'll get those to you however we need to, by mail,
hand
delivered,
cross-country road trip, whatever needs to happen.
We'll get it to you. But we really appreciate the time and hope that God has blessed you through the time of listening as it has for us going through this, and hope that it'll continue to bless this part of our ministry.
Well, that's our conversation for today. But that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode, or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.